The rumble of boots, the smell of hot bitumen, the whistle of picks in stone. Dust rises over the valleys of Italy, not from battle but from construction. While other peoples were still arguing over borders, Rome was already connecting its world with roads. The question is, how were they able to build 85,000 kilometers of stone arteries without machines, without concrete, without steel? And why do these roads live longer than many empires? The answer is hidden not only in engineering but also in the mindset of a people for whom the path was sacred. Historians wrote that the first great road, the Via Appia, began to be born in 312 BC, when Censor Appius Claudius ordered a path to be laid from Rome to Capua. By ancient standards, this was madness. Almost 190 kilometers through hills, swamps and stone fields, but the Romans did not know the word impossible. At the base of each road lay a multi-layered structure, as if, layer by layer, the armor of the empire was laid. This system was called agger, which meant embankment. First, a trench was dug, then it was filled with gravel, large stone, sand, and finally covered with basalt slabs polished to a mirror finish. The weight of each could exceed 300 kilograms. This was not just a path, it was a monument of power. Imagine how, under the engineer's hammer, stones were assembled into a living spine of the empire. When a legion marched along the Via Appia, the ground underfoot rang, as if the Roman Republic itself was going on the offensive. Warriors believed, a road is not a means, it is a weapon. It carried orders, bread, laws, legions. The term cursores denoted messengers who raced along these roads at a speed comparable to modern wheeled mail. They could deliver a message for hundreds of kilometers in a matter of days. For the ancient world, this was a miracle. Instant communication between provinces. Excavations show that even after 2000 years, beneath layers of earth and grass, the stone slabs still lie in their places, as if waiting for the legion's return. Archaeologists found traces of wheels, cut into the stone so deeply that it seems the road itself remembered history. But how to maintain such perfection over centuries? What compelled people to lay each slab with a jeweler's precision, knowing that they would never see the end of the path? The answer lies in military discipline. Roads were built by legions, not by slaves. Every soldier knew, to build a path means to conquer. According to various sources, about 10,000 people participated in the construction of the Via Appia. They toiled for months, slept under the open sky, ate dry grains and salted meat. But most importantly, every meter of the path was subject to Roman order. If the road's line deviated from straight, it was broken down and started anew. The Romans called this principle recta via, the straight road. This was not just an engineering solution, but a symbol of Roman thinking, to go straight despite obstacles. Even mountains could not make them turn aside. With each new road, Rome did not just connect cities, it linked the world into a single system. Stone by stone, path by path, the empire gave birth to a network that would outlast centuries. But to understand how they maintained this order over vast distances, one must look deeper, to where the road became not just a road, but a manifestation of Rome's military machine. With the first rays of the sun, thousands of soldiers already stood in formation, not with a sword, but with a shovel. Before them lay a stony slope, where Rome's new artery was soon to pass. This was not the labor of slaves, this was an army, building an empire. Every pickaxe strike was a blow against chaos, every stone a step towards eternity. Legionaries worked by order of the tribune, and above them stood the legate, a man responsible not only for battles, but also for construction. The Romans called such soldiers fabri, military engineers. They were trained just like gladiators, only their weapons were a square, a hoe, and a cord. Polybius wrote that without engineering, Rome could not have existed for a single day. Roads ensured the movement of troops, supply and power. With their help, the empire could transfer an entire legion hundreds of kilometers in a few weeks, while enemies were still floundering in the mud. To build 1 mile of road, about 100 tons of stone and 3 weeks of labor were required. The weight of each worker's tools and equipment reached 20 kilograms. In their bags, shovels, chisels, hammers, plumb bobs. And all this they carried themselves. Caesar's campaign diaries mention that the soldier of the Roman army marched up to 30 kilometers a day, carrying up to 40 kilograms of load. This was not just endurance, this was a system. Before starting work, legionaries set up a groma, a device for marking a straight line. Essentially, it was an ancient theodolite, a cross with plumb bobs thanks to which engineers could lay out the path with astonishing accuracy. Modern archaeologists researching the remains of roads in Britain were amazed. The error did not exceed 1 meter over tens of kilometers. Imagine how on the plain a living line slowly emerges, perfectly straight, like a string. Warriors in mud and dust do not see the whole picture, but their labor builds a network that could be discerned even from space. Rome created not just roads, it created order, the geometry of power, transforming chaos into straight lines. Each section of the road had layers, like a turtle's shell. The bottom layer of crushed stone retained moisture. The middle layer of small stones provided strength. The top layer of basalt reflected heat and withstood the weight of carts. Modern researchers from the Institute of Archaeology in Rome confirmed, thanks to such a structure, the roads could serve for more than 5 centuries without repair. When the work was completed, the first to pass along the road was a convoy with provisions: bread, wine, salt, grain. Soldiers knew, behind it would come detachments, and then senatorial couriers, tax collectors, merchants, pilgrims. The road became the bloodstream of civilization. And yet, in every stone of this system, the strictness of military regulations was felt. Any breach of order, punishment. If a legionary laid a slab unevenly, he was ordered to remove it and lay it again. If the road deteriorated, the blame fell not on the engineer, but on an entire detachment. Pliny the Elder wrote that it was precisely the fear of disgrace and precise calculation that made Rome's roads perfect. As the sun was setting, soldiers looked up at what they had created. From horizon to horizon stretched a bright strip, like a scar on the earth's body. Rome left its mark not in memory, but in stone. With each new kilometer, the network of via grew, roads connecting cities, fortresses, and harbors. And if someone at that time had risen high above Italy, he would have seen a giant spider web, with Rome at its center, and from it, threads leading to all ends of the earth. But what made these paths invincible even against time? Not only engineering precision, but also how Rome protected them. For every road had to be safe, and therefore, at crossroads and mountain passes, posts, towers and fortresses began to appear, where guards served day and night. The term mansio meant a stopping place, a resting spot for messengers and military personnel. There, one could change horses, get food, deliver a dispatch. These stations were located every 25 to 30 kilometers, and archaeologists found the remains even in remote provinces. The network of mansiones transformed the empire into a single organism, where information flowed through stone veins faster than an army could move. But the road was not only a connection, it was a border. Around it, Rome built bridges, aqueducts, settlements. Each road carried a promise. Where the path comes, Rome comes too. And once, when the empire stretched its paths from Spain to Mesopotamia, it became clear. Roads were no longer just roads. These were lines along which history itself flowed. And at their heart, the same discipline, the same silence, and the same sound of stone that echoed on the morning when the legions began their first day of construction. When the empire grew to such proportions that a courier could travel for months from Gaul to Egypt, roads became its arteries, and control over them a matter of survival. At dawn, when fog still lay, the iron rims of carts already rumbled over the stone slabs. The smell of wet stone mingled with the sweat of mules and the soot from tar torches. Thus began the day on a road that never slept. Each section of the path had its guardian, the curator viarum, an official responsible for the maintenance of roads. He was more than an administrator, an overseer of order, an engineer, and a judge simultaneously. His task was to ensure that the empire did not lose its connections. If a slab cracked, he had to find the culprit. If a bridge collapsed, he reported personally to Rome. And when senators rode along the smooth basalt, they knew, beneath each wheel, the labor of thousands of such unseen guardians. The Romans knew how to see in details what others considered trifles. Even the road's incline was calculated with degree-level precision so that water would not stagnate and destroy the stone. For this, they used the system of clava calicaris, an ancient form of drainage, sloped ditches that stretched along the road. Archaeologists in Spain found remains of such drains up to half a meter deep, and they still work. Imagine this sound. After a downpour, streams of water run through the stone channels like through the veins of a living creature. The road breathes, rumbles, smells of iron and rain. It is not just a thing, but an organism that lives for centuries. But the Romans went further. They understood that a road had to be not only durable, but also fast. For this, miliaria were created, stone pillars marking the distance to Rome. These were the first road signs in history. On them, the emperor's name and mileage figures were carved. A traveler walking along the road always knew how much remained until the center of the world. Each such pillar was not just a marker, but a symbol of the presence of power. When an army entered a new province, the first thing they did was erect a milarium. Thus the empire declared, now this too is part of Rome. And today, finding their fragments in Britain, Turkey or Syria, archaeologists say that even stones preserve Roman logic, order and distance. Livy wrote that on some roads, traffic never ceased for an hour. At night, convoys with grain moved, during the day, detachments of messengers, and in the evening, merchants and pilgrims. Along the way stood inns, smithies, temples of Mercury, the patron of travel. The air was filled with the smell of wine, hot oil and dust. It was a living stream where languages, peoples and destinies mingled. Bridges held a special place. Where rivers broke the landscape, Romans erected stone arches bound with lime mortar. They called them ponds, bridge. One of them, Pons Fabricius, built in 62 BC, still stands in Rome today. Its stones have witnessed the change of eras, emperors and peoples, but still withstand the steps of tourists. This is proof that Rome's engineering was not just skill, but an art of eternity. For such structures to withstand centuries, engineers used a substance that became legendary, Roman cement. It was called pozzolana, volcanic ash, which when mixed with lime and water created concrete that sat even underwater. Modern scientists have confirmed it is thanks to this mixture that Rome's roads and bridges have not crumbled in 2000 years. Each new kilometer of road was an act of political will, for a path is not only a means of transport, it is a method of control. Romans said, where there is a road, there is law. Legions moved along these roads, but also taxes, slaves, orders, rumors, everything that constituted the fabric of the empire flowed through these stone channels. Sometimes, in the silence of the night, footsteps could be heard on the roads. These were the cursores, the very messengers who carried emperors' letters. They ran, changing horses at each station, day and night. Tacitus's chronicles mention that a dispatch from Britain could reach Rome in 8 days, for its time almost a teleport. And yet, the roads were not silent. They absorbed traces of wars, blood and hope. When triumphal processions marched along them, the road hummed with the rumble of chariots. When legions returned along them after defeat, it sounded different, heavy, muffled, as if the earth itself grieved. Rome created a network unparalleled, but behind every kilometer was a price. Blood, labor, years. And at some point, roads became not just a symbol of power, but a test for the empire itself. Because the longer the path, the harder it is to hold its end. And in this fragile balance between order and distance, a new chapter of Roman history began, when roads, built for eternity, began to expose the limits of human capabilities. When the Roman road network reached the farthest borders of the empire, from the British hills to the sands of Syria, the very idea of a path transformed into a symbol of power. But the further the roads stretched, the harder it became to maintain them. Suddenly, a new enemy emerged before the Romans. Not barbarians, not rebellions, but time. and the fight against it proved no less exhausting than wars. On the outskirts of the empire, roads began to crack under the sun. Rains turned them into stone rivers, down which stones rolled. And yet, the Romans did not give up. In each region, beneficiarii operated, military officials responsible for the repair and protection of the roads. They lived by the roads, in small stone houses, monitored bridges and called for workers when cracks appeared. In epigraphic inscriptions found in Gaul, the names of such people are encountered. Simple, forgotten, yet it was they who preserved the pulse of the empire. The term vestigium meant trace, and it was these traces that showed archaeologists where the old roads ran. In Britain, beneath layers of turf, stone embankments tens of kilometers long were found, laid out so precisely that their lines could only be seen from the air. These traces seem to say, "Here a legionary's foot once trod, here Latin speech resounded, here Rome passed." But behind the outward order lay colossal logistics. Maintaining 85,000 kilometers of stone roads required hundreds of thousands of workers, animals, tools, and provisions. The Romans created what modern historians call the world's first road administration. The collection of taxes for road repair became a constant practice. Funds were allocated from each city, and officials reported to the Senate on the condition of the roads. Those who failed the plan risked losing not only their position, but also their honor. Posts and control towers stood on the roads where patrols checked caravans. In the provinces, especially in the east, roads were guarded by special detachments, stationari. They suppressed robberies, maintained order, and assisted travelers. In Roman papyri from Egypt, reports of such guards have been preserved. Dates, routes, merchants' complaints. This was an invisible army, thanks to which the roads remained safe. Imagine a night caravan moving through the desert, the flickering of torches, the shouts of drivers, the dull clinking of chains on camels. Along the road, watchtowers, where fires burn so travelers know they are still within the empire. This was not just a network, it was the breath of order amidst the chaos of barbarian lands. Archaeological data confirms, in some places, roads were up to 8 meters wide, enough for 2 convoys to pass without stopping. Side ditches collected water, and stone curbs stood along the edges, protecting the slabs from destruction. When modern engineers studied the structure of Via Domitia in Spain, they recognized that there was not a single random element in Roman roads. Everything was subject to the logic of strength and durability. But like any living system, roads needed renewal. Emperors arranged grand inspections. For example, under Augustus, an audit of all roads in Italy was carried out. Chronicles report, the emperor personally traveled along them, accompanied by engineers checking the condition of the slabs. After this inspection, many old sections were rebuilt and strengthened. It was then that the idea arose to place altars and statues of gods along the roads, so that the path would become not only safe, but also sacred. The road like an open-air temple. Along it stood stone steles with images of the goddess Fortuna, guardian of luck. A traveler passing by would leave a coin or a piece of bread. Thus the Romans connected the engineering with the divine, stone and prayer, practice and faith. But the further the network expanded, the more sacrifices it demanded. In the mountains of Asia Minor, roads had to be laid through rocks, blasting them with fire and water. In the hot provinces of the east, workers died from heat, and in the north, from cold and wind. Livy wrote, "Rome built roads as it waged war, without pity and without rest." Over time, roads became a symbol of the very idea of Rome, a power that knows no distances. Pliny asserted, "No people has subdued the earth as the Romans subdued it with stone." And indeed, the road transformed foreign territory into part of the empire faster than an army. However, a paradox began to grow within this grandiose network. The more perfect the roads became, the faster not only orders, but also rebellions, rumors and diseases spread along them. What connected the empire also began to destroy it from within. On these same stones, along which triumphal processions once marched, now moved fugitives, marauders and foreign armies. And then Rome first felt that the roads, created for eternity, could become its own nooses. But before the network began to weaken, it still managed to reach its peak, an era when roads became not just infrastructure but a living symbol of power that seemed endless. By the beginning of the 2nd century AD, Rome's roads reached the apogee. The empire, stretching across dozens of countries of the modern world, was stitched together by stone threads, along which life flowed. The rumble of chariots, the clinking of horseshoes, the smell of dust and leather, all this was the breath of the eternal city. From Rome, one could walk to the ocean without losing the way. Miliaria, these stone witnesses of time, stood along the roads like guardians, reminding every traveler, all roads lead to Rome. At this time, roads became not just an engineering achievement, they transformed into an instrument of political stability. Not only troops and goods moved along them, but also power. The emperor's envoys, officials, judges, tax collectors, all depended on speed, and if potholes or washouts appeared on the road, it was perceived as a threat to the state. Therefore, Emperor Trajan created a special institution, Curatores Viarum Publicarum, supervisors of public roads, directly subordinate to the Senate. This was a bureaucratic network, as powerful as the stone one. At crossroads, triumphal arches were erected, monuments dedicated to great victories. Their white marble gleamed under the sun as legions marched along the road. Dust, raised by thousands of feet, settled on the bas-reliefs where scenes of triumph were carved. History walked along the road, and the road absorbed history. Particularly impressive was the path through the Alps, Via Claudia Augusta. It ascended to an altitude of over 1,000 meters, passing through snowy mountain passes, where even eagles did not fly. The Romans carved steps into the stone. Pliny wrote that in the mountains the road clings to the rocks like an eagle's claw. Archaeologists found remnants of retaining walls that still hold the mass of rock. This was not just a path, it was a declaration of power over nature. Imagine, a legion ascends, boots slide on ice, breath turns into steam. Behind them, Rome. Ahead, clouds. Legionaries carry shovels, picks, hoes. Every stone was laid by the hands of those who were ready to die for the road. Not for glory, not for gold, for an order that would outlive them all. To facilitate movement on such roads, special carts with narrow wheels were used. They were called plaustra. The traces of these wheels, two parallel grooves, can be seen on the slabs even today. Scientists from Naples established the width of these traces is identical across Europe, from Italy to Germany. This means that Rome created the first track gauge standard in history, a norm that ensured the compatibility of all vehicles. Thus was born the idea of unification, upon which modern states later built their systems. But roads served not only power, they became roads of faith. Missionaries, philosophers, pilgrims traveled along them. It was along Roman roads that Christianity spread, from Judea to Gaul. Apostle Paul traveled on the same stones that legions had once marched upon. Roman engineering became an unwitting conduit for a new idea that would later change the world. Archaeological findings confirm small chapels, crosses and gravestones were built along the roads. Every traveler dying far from home wanted to remain by the road, to be part of the movement even after death. These stone inscriptions can still be read, wishes for good fortune, prayers, names of those who never returned. Roads became a chronicle of human destiny. Their stones remembered the steps of emperors and slaves, soldiers and merchants, lovers and fugitives. They heard laughter, shouts, groans, prayers. And when archaeologists today clear another slab from the earth, they feel as if they hear the echo of that rumble, of wheels driving destiny forward. From a military perspective, roads allowed Rome to react instantly. In case of a threat from a province, legions could set out within hours. The distance from Rome to the Rhine, almost 1,500 kilometers, could be covered in 30 days, an incredible speed for the ancient world. This made the empire almost invulnerable. But in this also lay a weakness. The faster an army could move, the more it depended on the roads. When the path scrambled, so did order. Later, during times of decline, roads began to be overgrown with grass. Without oversight, without legions, without taxes, they lost their life. However, during the era of Trajan and the Antonines, the roads still shone. The empire seemed eternal. The stone was smooth. The bridges stood. The posts smoked with torches. In the evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon, the path turned golden, as if the earth itself thanked those who bound it together. But the higher Rome ascended, the deeper the crack beneath its slabs became, and when it finally split the earth, the roads for the first time ceased to lead to eternity. They began to lead to decline. The decline of the Roman Empire did not happen suddenly. It stretched like a crack in marble, an imperceptibly growing fissure that at first could be plastered with lime, reinforced with a prop, silenced in reports. But the roads felt this fracture before anyone else. Like living organisms, they were the first to lose sensitivity. Posts disappeared, stations fell silent, overgrown vegetation began to reclaim the verges. Where chariots once rumbled, now grasses rustled. The decline began with finances. Tax revenues decreased, as provinces grew poorer and legions rebelled more frequently. Road workers demanded wages, lime, tools. The empire, however, spent resources on wars with barbarians and internal conflicts. When the maintenance of the curatores viarum was cut, oversight weakened. Repairs were entrusted to local communities, and this was the first signal. The road ceased to be a matter of the state. It became a matter of survival. Along with the departure of the administration, the cursus publicus, the postal system, also disappeared. Couriers no longer raced across the empire with emperor's orders. Messages were delayed. Cities lived in isolation, and the government in ignorance. Where it once took 5 days, now it required 20. The empire's speed dropped, and with it, its power. Barbarians did not destroy the roads intentionally. They simply marched along them. It was Roman paths that led the Goths to Rome, the Vandals to Carthage, the Huns to Pannonia. The irony of fate, what once bound the empire, now opened the shortest path to its heart for enemies. One modern historian said, Rome fell not by the sword, but by the road along which that sword came. In the 4th century, emperors tried to revive the system. Constantine the Great issued decrees on the restoration of road stations and obliged cities to provide slaves for repairs. But there was no longer enough discipline or will. Stones torn from old roads began to be used for walls and temples. In Byzantium, only isolated sections remained of the former grandeur, along which pilgrims and soldiers passed. Nevertheless, the roads did not disappear completely. They transformed into the bones of an ancient organism upon which new civilizations later grew. Medieval caravans, pilgrims, and merchants followed the same lines that legions once did. Even many modern highways in Europe are descendants of those ancient routes. From Rome to London, from Milan to Cologne. If you look at a map, you can see the shadow of the old framework, still holding the continent together. But in late antiquity, these roads became a symbol of loss. Along them now walked not victors, but fugitives. Families living ruined cities carried children and vessels on carts, saving what could be saved. Crosses stood on the verges where travelers perished. The wind raised dust from the slabs, and it seemed that the stones themselves whispered the names of fallen empires. Among the ruins of the roads, rare inscriptions have been preserved. On one stone, found in Campania, it is carved, Viator siste gradum, hic Roma fuit, traveler, stop your step, here Rome was. This phrase became a metaphor for the era. The road still stands, but what it was built for is no more. Christian chroniclers interpreted the roads differently. For them, they became a symbol of transition, a path from the pagan world to the spiritual world. Monks traveled along the old routes carrying the gospel. They saw in them not the remnants of an empire, but a bridge between the earthly and the eternal. Thus, Rome's roads acquired a new, almost mystical meaning. Gradually, monasteries arose in the places of old stations. Where emperors' messengers once rested, now hermits settled. Roads ceased to be paths of power, they became paths of redemption. And if earlier a person walked along them for an order, now it was for the salvation of the soul. But despite the spiritual transformation, the physical structure was dying. Stone slabs went underground, turning into an archaeological layer. In some places, for example in southern Italy, roads were covered with ash from Vesuvius eruptions, as if time itself decided to preserve them. In others, they were carried away by floods, dismantled by peasants, used for foundations. And yet, if one stands on a preserved section of the Via Appia today, one can feel a strange sensation, as if beneath one's feet is not just stone but memory. This road does not belong to the past, it belongs to movement. It still leads somewhere, even if the destination has long been forgotten. Rome disappeared, but the roads remained, and in this, their final victory. They outlived emperors, armies, deities, languages. Stone proved more durable than power, and the path more eternal than he who walks upon it. Thus ended the era of roads, but another began, an era of shadows in which the stones were silent and people once again learned to find their own way.